If I license something to you, I'm granting you rights to do something that would otherwise be illegal. And that is the important definition when we talk about open source. The other ones are kind of the same thing. They also cover the actual physical. I'm sorry. They also cover the actual physical license, like your driver's license. But like I said, number one is the one that we're going to be talking about mostly today. Okay. Now we talk about copyright. It's also a very important concept when we deal with open source. What is copyright? Once again, this is the definition from the government. It is written by Title 17 U.S. Code, which I'm sure is this absolutely huge document that no one in their right mind ever wants to read. So I think this is kind of the essential piece of the copyright code. It allows the author of original works of authorship, including literary, dramatic, musical, artistic, certain other intellectual works, including software and hardware, to protect their creation. These are the rights the copyright law gives you as an author. It allows you to reproduce your work. It allows you to produce derivative works, i.e. I take something, I change it, it becomes a derivative work because it's based on the original. It allows you to distribute your copies and to display or perform the work publicly. The important part of this is that no one else has this right to your work. I create something, I have these rights, no one else does. That's where we start bringing in open source licensing. It's saying that I can take my rights and give you part of them. Now, when we talk about open source licenses, what is an open source license? The common definition is that an open source license is one that is approved by the Open Software Initiative, the OSI. To be an open source license, these are their requirements. You have to allow free redistribution. That doesn't mean that you can't charge for the medium that you distribute on, but you cannot restrict distribution further. If I give something to you, you're allowed to pass it on to others. You get the source code of the binary compiled computer code. You're allowed to create derived works. If you use something that I create and you want to change it and pass it on, you can. Integrity of author source code. That means that if I write something, you cannot take it and take parts of it and say that you wrote it. Once again, like we said earlier, that's part of your responsibility. You cannot discriminate against people or groups or fields of endeavor. I think that this is a very important distinction here. A lot of people who are big into open source and down on commercial software would say, yes, anyone in the world can use my product except for Microsoft. A license like that will not be approved by the OSI. So it will not be a true open source license.
Or would that also apply, I guess, to military or foreign military applications where used against us?
Yes, it does. Now remember that licenses are, specifically open source licenses, are governed by the strictures of U.S. copyright law or the applicable copyright law within your country. So the government says that I cannot export certain things to Iraq. That does not mean that it doesn't fit under this definition, because that is a different law and it's not covered by the license. The license does not explicitly say you can't use this if you're in Iraq. That's a different part of the U.S. law. It's not totally separate from copyright. License must not restrict other software. I will figure out what that one meant. What that means basically is I cannot have a license on my software that says if you use my software or distribute my software, everything else must be open source. Like if you include my software in a CD, I cannot state that everything else on that CD must be open source. What this is saying is that my license applies to my software, and I can't force my constraints on anybody else.
So I charge for that.
You can, depending on the license. We'll cover a little bit about what licenses will allow you to do certain things a little bit later. But like I said, you can charge for the media. So if it costs me a couple dollars to produce a CD, I can charge you a couple dollars to make a CD. Of course, it costs that much more.
But if you have a class that's open source, and I take that class and I incorporate it into a package in my writing, I can charge for that package.
Depending on the license. If there are some licenses that allow that, there are some that do not. I will talk about a few on each side in a few moments. Okay? And the license must be technology neutral. Basically, I can't say that you can only use this on a PC and not a Mac. Or I can't say that you can only use this on brand X computer or with brand Y product. You know, it's just trying to keep it generic so that it can apply to more than one product. Yes. Skip that one on there? No,
You said it must be specific to a product.
I was just thinking, that was on there. I must have skipped that somehow. Sorry. Must not be specific to a product. When I first read that, I kind of thought, that's strange, because there were licenses. There's the ZLib license, which was written for the ZLib product. There's the WX Widgets, or WX Windows license that was written for WX Windows. But they do not, those both are considered OSI open source licenses because they were written for a product and name a product, but you can use that license on other products. Nowhere in the ZLib license does it say this license only applies to the ZLib library. Okay. Since we're a robotics club, I thought we'd better talk a little bit about open hardware. How can hardware be open under these definitions? Unlike software, of course, hardware costs something. It produces a physical thing. Duplicating it costs something. When we're discussing open hardware, usually we're talking about the design, the schematics, the plans, things like that. When you license a piece of hardware or hardware design under an open source license, what you're freeing is that design. No one's really expecting you to build something and then be required to give it away for free. No, okay. I had a question there.
No, there's something floating in the air there.
I understand. Okay. Now, mind you, if you want to hand away things for free, I'm always willing to take them. All right. We talked a little bit about this. Open source licenses are copyright licenses. This is the authorized others part of the copyright law. What an open source license does is say that I have these rights and I am waiving these parts under these conditions. I'm saying that I've written this, I own it, I've copyrighted it, but I'm allowing all of you to use it. I'm allowing all of you to further distribute it. A lot of people think that open source licenses are trying to be a rejection of copyright law. That actually could be further from the truth. All open source licenses are built on top of copyright law. They depend on copyright law for their enforcement. They depend on copyright law for their protections. And there are always going to be people out there who want something for nothing. Well, that's human nature. Doesn't fit under here. A lot of them want to try to hide under the open source banner saying it's my right to get everything for free. That's not what open source is about. That is, in common parlance, piracy. Okay. A lot of people have this question. What's the difference between open source and free software? I mean, they're used largely interchangeably. The difference technically is that an open source license is approved by the OSI. It is concerned with those items that we saw earlier. That's all that it's concerned with. Free software is defined by the Free Software Foundation. They tend to cover everything that the OSI does, but they are more focused on what they call freedom of software, not the price. English does not have a difference between the word free, meaning no cost, and the word free, meaning unrestricted or having freedom. Some languages do. French actually does. So we're talking about what would be Libre software under French. I don't speak French. That's the limit. That's all we're going to talk about.
You accidentally backed
Yeah, I
up
did, didn't I? Like, wait a minute. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. The differences in practical uses are very small unless you have a specific goal. Once again, when I get to the actual licenses, I'll talk a little bit about what those goals might be. I tend to use open source when I'm talking about either open source or free software unless there's a specific reason I need to make a distinction. So most of what I say using the term open source will apply to free software as well.